everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And I'm so pleased to be joined by the novelist Jenny Colgan to talk about her latest novel, Close Knit, which is published by Hodder Stoughton. Hello, Jenny.
Hi, Alistair. How you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. So I'm interested to hear the answer to this. How do you describe Close Knit to people?
Well, it's really about groups of kind of community groups. In this case, it's about knitting and crochet. That's what they like to do. But it's about any kind of group of people, often women, that like to get together and have a bit of a blether and deal with life that way. And it's about the youngest member of this group, this kind of knitting group, and she's kind of trying to break out and make her own life without it being commented on by this kind of chorus of wifeys all the time. So that's what it's about.
And what inspired you to write it?
I really noticed how I really felt during the pandemic. We all got so stuck and so isolated, and people found it so hard to get back out there. Even silly little things like going back to choir, and there was so many people who just dropped out, and all these community things, charity things that used to get people together, people were doing them a lot less. So it's really about that, and how we know how important it is. Every single study shows to spend time doing something fun with other folk. It doesn't even matter what it is. So in fact, in this book, it's knitting, but it can be anything you like. My brother made me laugh today. He's a big, he likes, those flight simulations.
Yes.
Where like you sit in your house, but you fly to New York. And he said, and then the air traffic control people. And I said, what do you mean the air traffic control people? There's people that, for all the people that do flight simulations, there's actually a bunch of, I'm going to say guys, because it's mostly guys, who do air traffic control simulations. So they just sit at home going, right, 02 Oscar, take a turn to the left. And I just love that. But, anything that gets you communicating with other people. And ideally, actually, that's something you do from home. I think we need to get back out there.
Because the knitting circle, or the KCs in your book, they do all meet in your room. There is a kind of place where they all kind of meet up to do this, and I think that is an important thing, that people have somewhere to kind of get together and get out and just kind of share.
Yeah, I do. I really think it's really important. And it doesn't matter what it is, if it's playing in a band or if it's going to play bowls, or, what it is not important. The fact that you do it is important.
I know you were at the Edinburgh Book Festival just the other day, and I was through earlier in August. I've really felt this year, it felt kind of back to normal, whatever normal is for Edinburgh. And it's not just going to see things, it is meeting up with people in places and spaces and that maybe you haven't seen for a while, you maybe don't see from year to year, or with the pandemic even longer. And that does seem to be really at the kind of heart of the buzz that happens around there.
Yeah, I think one of the terms that I hadn't known before the pandemic was parasocial relationships. Do you know what I mean by that?
No, I'm not sure.
It's so it's people, so generally, you would talk to your family and you talk to your very close friends and your spouse, but you wouldn't see the bus driver that you see every day, or in my case, writers that I'll see twice a year at parties or book festivals. And it was amazing how much you missed then. Yeah. It's so weird. The person that smiles at you when you go swimming in the morning, it was those relationships where people you don't know well enough to have had them in your circle or to have them around your house, but they're part of what makes your life nice, is trading a wee joke with your postman or whatever. And so that's kind of interesting to me. In the book festival or anything like that is full of that. It's full of people you don't see very often, but you're delighted when you do see them. It's nice.
No, absolutely. And the knitting circle, who was the inspiration for them? Was that people you know personally?
Oh, I don't think you can be a woman getting older in Scotland without without understanding. Funnily enough, I lived in France for a long time, and there's really no difference. But I think women get to a certain age, I'm certainly getting to it now, where you really stop giving a stuff about what other people think. You just don't care. If you need to tell off a wee laddie on the bus that won't put his headphones on, you'll just do it, Do not litter around a certain age of Scottish lady is what I would say. So, I think it's something that, much as getting older can be full of kind of shocks, and certainly occasionally it's full of sadness, but it's also full of a lot of joyous things as well. And one of them is just having the confidence to not care. So that kind of embarrassing way your mother used to behave is now how I behave.
But the knitting itself actually is integral to the plot. What was the idea of the book? I mean, where did you come up with this kind of idea? We won't give spoilers, I'm very wary of that, but how the plot unfolds, did you have that right from the beginning?
Well, I'm quite, my mother kind of taught knitting. She was a peripatetic knitting and sewing teacher. So I'd always grown up in a family. My grandmother was a kind of ferocious knitter, really. She was very good, but she had absolutely no taste. So she was always sending you horrible, like purple cardigans with like black sleeves and stuff like that. So I grew up knitting and not sewing so much, but I can certainly knit. So part of it was that. It's just something that I knew about and something that I liked to do. And then of course a lot of the other stuff in the book that we come across. We have planes and bad weather and all sorts of stuff, which is always fun.
I was thinking about, you were talking about someone doing flight simulators and whether that was something that, obviously there's a lot of flying going on in the book as well. Was that an idea that came from that, or I know you'd written about that character previously, so was that always going to be in the book, this kind of
well I enjoyed it, and it's dramatic flying, it always is. And so I'd written a book called Summer Skies about a pilot, so I'd done a lot for that, and I'd taken flying lessons and so on, so I kind of enjoyed that side of things, and I thought it was fun to write about. So I've carried on writing. You don't need to have read Summer Skies to read Close Knit. They're very different stories, but if you have read them both, then they're linked. It's nice.
So you took flying lessons. That is very method.
Well, no, I mean, I was writing about a pilot. Actually, I'll tell you the truth. I took one because I just wanted to see what it was like. And of course, they take you in a tiny, tiny little plane. It's like a tin can on a bike, And but you take off from Glasgow Airport. You take off from the actual airport, so it's like an Airbus that's going off to Dubai, and then it's you piddling along, and that was kind of mad and fun. And what was really interesting, has always been interesting to me, is how much pilots love being pilots. They love their jobs. They love to fly. It's the same if you've ever met a train driver. They love driving trains. It's very often the kind of thing they've wanted to do since they were children. And so we went up, we piddled around Greenock, and that was kind of fun. And then we came back down again with the great big planes coming in. And the instructor kind of turned to me at the end, and he was like, "Oh, wasn't that amazing?" And I was like, "Oh, that was very nice. Thank you very much." He genuinely couldn't believe that you could have the capacity to take, to learn how to fly, and yet, I really just wanted to see what it was like sitting at the front of an airplane and steering it, which was as much as they let me do for about 2 minutes. So
and you thought it was going to change your life, that you would come away being in love with.
I think he had a very long history of taking up people who were desperate to do it and just fell in love with it. I think people do very easily just fall madly in love with it.
That's interesting as well, because the character of Gertie, who we'll go into a bit more in a moment, goes on the plane for the first time, and that what you're experiencing and that kind of worries that you must have on a small plane, are all there. Was that based on your own experience in a way?
Well, I don't get scared of flying, but I do take little planes quite a lot, because I tour quite a lot up in the Highlands and Islands. So I'm on wee planes all the time, and it's really other people's reactions that always make, I don't mind clambering into a tiny wee thing, but other people's faces, because especially if you're getting on somewhere like Prestwick or Glasgow, the planes are quite big, and folk, you do hear quite a lot of people going, "Christ."
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very different thing from going on your holidays in a Boeing 747 to getting on.
You're very different. Yeah. You'll know about it if you're sitting over the propeller. Yeah.
And I think, in fact, I'm sure this is the first book I've read that has instructions for how to knit your own hat and headband, if you should prefer, in the back.
And headband. Well, it's a nice thing to do, knitting, and I think people get so caught up and stuck in their phones and nonsense, and I think it's nice to have a few options if you're not in the mood to do that. It's a nice thing to do while you're watching TV or listening to an audiobook, I think. So yes, so there's a few very simple patterns to get you on your way.
I showed my mum the book when she was over the other day, and she's keen to try it out. So if I do get one, I'll send you a picture of me modeling.
Awesome. Yeah. I want a picture of everybody's hat.
And it's set in the village. Is a village of Carso? Would you say, is that the kind of?
Yes, it's kind. Well, do you know? I did the John O'Groats Literary Festival, and that was really because it was just an excuse to go up there, really. And we drove up, and of course, it's so much further.
Yeah.
You know, as we know very well, the Mercator projection does Scotland absolutely no favours. And so it's, you know, we just could not believe how far it was. And I loved that feeling of being higher than the Highlands, you know, even when, you know, I'm from the Central Belt. So when I get an idea in my head of the North, I think of hills and mountains. But no, if you carry on, it gets flat again. And I love that idea that you could be so far north. You were further north than the Highlands, and you go up there and there's a big flat top of the world and the water's all going round. And I just thought it was stunning. I thought it was really amazing. And so I wanted to set some stories there because I just thought it was such an interesting place to be.
And we've mentioned,
and what makes people choose to go that far?
Yeah, and I think that's that kind of isolation's really interesting. I've been reading a few novels based on people on islands, and there is something about the isolation that is interesting in itself, because those communities, people aren't just hopping on trains to the next village or on buses to, you know, they're kind of self-contained, unless you've got a plane, of course.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And you do really need to depend on your neighbours. You're far away from a hospital, you know, your multi-generational kind of communities are really, really important, especially if you're a place that can get cut off. So yeah, well, it was funny when I was up in John O'Groats and they were all talking about how brilliant the nights out were in Kirkwall. And I love just to imagine anyone living somewhere where their idea of a big night out was Kirkwall I thought was fabulous. I loved it up there.
There's a great depiction of the kind of Cayley nights in the village hall here, which, you know, having been, particularly I spent time on Arran, you know, the whole age, all ages would be there. And you know, you would get everything from a right good Cayley to the, you know, the latest, you know, chart topper or whatever it was back in the day. It's just a real mix of everyone goes because there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's the same. I mean, I live in a village in Fife, and you know, and we have ours, and yeah, that's I would hope that, you know, to Scottish people, that would feel extremely familiar to you, what it's like on Cayley night when folk get their hair done, and yeah, there's absolutely, I love that too. And I used to love taking our kids, and they just disappear, you know. They just know that the further away they are from you, the less likely they are to get found. And of course, if it's in June, it's not going to get dark. So
I was kind of put in mind of the kind of when they all get together in Local Hero, and you've got the kind of punks kicking about, and then you've got the old boys and all that kind of, all life is here.
Oh, I love Local Hero. Yeah. I would say Local Hero is a big influence on a lot of Scottish writers, particularly my age. You know.
Absolutely. And as it was said there, it's set in this place that you've set a previous novel. Is this going to be a series of novels set in this place, or do you not know?
Well, I tell you what I tend to do is, because I grew up in a library and always borrowing books from a library, and the one thing, you know, if you grew up in a library, is you can never read a series because you'll never get them in order. So what I tend to do is I write stories set around communities, but that you don't necessarily need to have read them in order. You don't necessarily, so it'll be a new bunch of people, but it'll be in the same environment. And I like this environment. So I think then yes, we've got one coming out, which is about the housing crisis. That sounds really glum. It's a hilarious comedy about the housing crisis, but how even up there, it's hard because people buy these for second houses and then everybody is completely stuffed. And then people come up to their second houses and they're like, oh, well, there's no restaurants. And you're like, well, how could there be a restaurant? There's nowhere to live.
It's such a familiar story, particularly I think the further north you go, that's the thing, but also in the borders as well, where there's that kind of real tension that happens. And it is, as you just mentioned, with what you sounds like you're going to write about next, there's a real modern identity to it too. I think if you were to say to people, well, it's kind of based around a knitting circle in the north of Scotland, then they might have certain expectations. But, you know, the pandemic is mentioned. You've got cultural references such as Chris Drever, and I think you know, watching Northern Exposure, which is almost historical itself now, but you know, it's a fairly modern reference for me. Was that really important that, you know, this is today, it's not set in some kind of idealized place, there's real life there as well?
Yes, I think so. But I also think, because I've lived away for a long time, I was away from Scotland for about 25 years, and I think people often don't realise who haven't lived in different places what a nice country it is to live in, and how pleasant most folk are, and how chatty people are. And I genuinely believe that. I don't believe that nationalities are better than other nationalities. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that culturally there is a way of doing things in Scotland, one that I really, really like, and two that doesn't change very much. Which is just, I mean, famously where we live in Fife, we've got a railway station but no cab rank. And about 3 or 4 times people have turned up to interview me, assuming there'll be a cab rank. You can't walk to our house from the station. And every single time someone's just rolled along and said, oh, you know, what's up? And just given them a lift.
Yeah.
Like, it's so fundamentally instinctive that you would do that. And it's not the same everywhere. So I don't feel I'm writing old fashioned or contemporary or anything. I'm just writing, obviously, a slightly, it's just life with the boring bits taken out, you know, a faintly more romantic version. But in fact, I think a lot of it is extremely true to life.
And I think that this idea of small community, because community is at the heart of the book, isn't it, really? You know, the way the community comes together to overcome a crisis, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And even going back to the dances and everything, people who have stayed in an area that kind of size, they know each other's secrets, they know each other's past, they've probably had relationships together, have either failed or, and that's key to it as well, isn't it? There's little hiding from each other.
Well, I mean, certainly when I was growing up, and I grew up in Prestwick, which isn't a village, but it's a wee town, and there is that very strong sense that everybody knows everybody's business. And when I was growing up, I didn't like that. I wanted to go away to the big city. And then, of course, when I moved back to Scotland, I did like it because I had my own children and I wanted to know that they weren't getting into trouble, you know. So, you know, it's just your stages of life, really, that it changes. And I also write a series set in Edinburgh, set in a big city, and that of course is very different because you know, you can kind of disappear and kind of make yourself out in a slightly different way, and people won't necessarily know or care. And that's the tension of life if you're lucky enough to be able to move to different places.
And you know, I mentioned Local Hero, and when people are kind of talking about their school days, Gertie and Morag and Struan, some of these essential characters, and you're hearing about the school days and maybe the misunderstandings that went on there, it almost reminded me of a kind of John Hughes movie dynamic, you know, someone's, you know, mistaken, they think that this person thinks this thing, and then they find out years later that wasn't the case. Is there any inspirations we might not expect into your writing in this book?
I think a huge inspiration for me that people don't really read anymore, which is amazing, although they watch him on TV, is James Herriot. Is a massive influence on me. He's got that mix of genuine warmth and he's genuinely funny. And it's, if I was aiming for something, it would be the way you feel when you read a James Herriot book, that kind of not feeling very well could have a James Herriot book, you know. So that he's a massive influence. But what's interesting to me is, one, as I get older, I've got whole decades where I can't quite remember what happened, but your memories, most people's memories of particularly senior school are extraordinarily vivid, extraordinarily close. And that's, I suppose it's when your adult brain starts to make its new memories, but it's amazing to me how pinpoint it is. And also I've got one kid at college, but my other two are at senior school. And, you know, you think, oh, children change, whatever. They don't, they don't, it's all the same, you know, and that's interesting. They have the same discipline. They may look slightly more sophisticated and have slightly better skincare routines, but you know, fundamentally they're all going through the same stuff, and it never changes all over the world. And that's kind of amazing, really. They're just you've just got to get through it. But it's really interesting. You see it time and time again how much what happens in secondary school stays with you for the rest of your life. It's nuts, eh?
And that's the thing, I think, particularly with Gertie, isn't there? There's certain things that she either heard or thinks she heard, which absolutely still shape her to this very day.
Well, yeah, but I think it's true of most people that you get a sense in secondary school, and then you spend your life either proving them wrong or just settling in and proving them right, you know. And I think it's I don't think it's any better or worse for almost any type of person that goes there. I remember reading an interview with, oh God, it was an American writer, really one of these really glamorous, gorgeous, successful, married to somebody famous American writers. And they said, are you happy? And she said, yes, because I wake up every day and I don't have to go to high school again. And I was like, my God, that's you? She's like a supermodel. And I was like, she thinks like that? And I thought, well, there you go. And I quite like being able to tell my own kids, yeah, guess what? It's rubbish. Everything else will be better.
Can you talk a bit about the characters themselves, particularly you've got Gertie, Jean, her mother, Struan, and Morag. You know, how do you approach writing these characters? How do you begin to get into their heads, if you like?
Kind of tend to pick on an idea that is interesting. I liked writing Struan. I like that idea of someone that's massively famous at school, and then it's kind of like, you know, Billy Big Paws, and then, you know, you come back 20 years later and they're still there. I mean, that's fundamentally quite funny in its own right, you know. So I liked that. I thought that was very funny. That, you know, what kind of person would that be? And I thought, well, it'd be even funnier if he's like teaching at the schools. He's a teacher. You know, he just kind of got stuck. So he was, but also like the idea that even though he had been a kind of quite the hot boy at school, he was always a nice guy. He wasn't, you know, he was just one of those guys that used to hang around the music room all the time. So he was fun to write because you can see very clearly that kind of crush, you know, that girls have on unthreatening boys, you know, when they're that age. And then I wanted to write about Gertie because I wanted to write about someone that lives in their head a lot. And you get that a lot with writers, but, you know, the idea that, you know, you're walking down the street and like, I don't know, Timothy Chalamet will crash his car in front of you and you'll have to rescue him. And I think those kinds of things are very, very common, you know, when you're just idly walking along and daydreaming. And I thought that was fun because I also think there's a point where people tip over and they go too far and stop getting on with their own lives because they can't quite live up to their fantasy life, and or it's too scary to put yourself out there because, and this is also a post-pandemic thing, isn't it, that people are finding it really hard to just get themselves out there. So she needs a big shove in the right direction to get herself going. So you're kind of always looking for, you're not looking at people, you don't take it from people, you know, you're always looking for ideas of things that will be interesting, and then you kind of add, you get more of a picture in your head. It starts to become clearer in terms of how they move or how they talk to their families, and then everything kind of flows from that, really.
And Gertie and Jean's relationship's a really lovely one, actually. But really, she's so protective of her daughter, but then she also wants her daughter to be free, for want of a better term.
Yeah, I think that's parenthood, isn't it? You want them, you know, you want them to be your baby forever, but you want them to go out and conquer the world, you know. And also it is the nature of the society, of course, because of how we lionize kind of celebrity and achievement. But, you know, you're probably not going to have a Simone Biles, you know. You're probably just going to have a totally normal kid. So for every kid that's like 15 years old and at the Olympics, you know, you've just got your kid that doesn't have enough sport medication. So that kind of push-pull of wanting to let them go, I'm terrible. I'm better with my younger kids, but my poor elders want to let them go, but also completely incapable of going, well, you should watch for this, or you should do this, you know, and micromanaging stuff is something I have to watch in myself. So Jean is desperate for Gertie to build her own life, but also can't keep her big nose out, which I would say is probably closer to me than I would like it to be.
But of course, Gertie also has that comfort that not her mum, but also the KCs provide. And that can be attractive to kind of say, oh, I'm safe here. It's my cocoon. It's my a place where I know things won't hurt me because I've got the support around me. And then you have to take risks. And she does take risks by kind of breaking out, not breaking away from that, but, you know, moving outside of it.
It's true. I mean, we are seeing, not to kind of put terribly kind of serious things onto anything, but, you know, we're living at a period of unprecedented human comfort, you know, where it's perfectly easy to never leave the house, to never go home, to have all your physical needs met. And of course, one thing we're discovering unexpectedly is psychologically that's incredibly bad for people. It's terribly bad for people to have no need to go and try stuff and do stuff and meet people and interact, because we know what makes people happy, and it's not sitting at home in a room. So, you know, that's a kind of, it's a push pull for the whole developed world, really. Is, you know, if you can just about get by, you've got a roof over your head, then, you know, you need to make yourself do everything.
Yeah.
And we are seeing less, I would say, more with the young men. We're seeing young men who just aren't coming to grips with life at all. Anyway, that makes it sound deeper than it is. But, you know, I think it is an issue when things are it's very easy not to do stuff now in a way that it wasn't ever before.
Yeah.
You know, if you wanted money, you had to go to the post office. And if you know, you just had to get out, and now you don't.
Yeah, it's true. It's come back to what you'd said about the post-pandemic problem of not meeting people. The idea of either going to the bank or going to the shop, or you really don't.
Yeah, go to the video shop and choose a video and talk to someone else who's renting a video, you know? But people used to meet like that all the time. I don't know. Yeah, whereas as opposed to swiping on a screen, I can't, oh my God, I know. Do you know what also though? I mean, old people always worry about young people. They'll figure it out. They're all fine and they're all delights and they don't get drunk and they're all sweet. But yeah, it is, I think society's made it a little easier than it ought to be to live your life completely by yourself. And we're humans, we're not.
I'm very keen, as I said, not to give any spoilers, but events do take a dramatic turn, and quickly take a dramatic turn. Are they exhilarating to write when suddenly adventure is happening and you know, unfolds quickly?
It is really good fun, and I've had a few, you know, in my time. I guess I've had some plane crashes. I wrote a really big fire. It is kind of exciting to write, but also it's quite silly because you kind of know that it's going to end up all right. If it's one of my books, it's going to end up all right. And then when people come in, they go, "Oh, I was really worried," and you're like, "Well, how could you possibly be worried? It's a story," and that's kind of adorable. Yes, yeah, although there's quite a lot, and you can never, I don't know how film people do it. There's quite a lot of where's somebody's hand, where's somebody's leg, how did somebody get up, but you know, there's quite a lot of that kind of stuff. But yeah, you need a little bit of excitement. And now that's why I really like writing the planes. Crashing planes is fun.
There is real tension there, I'll say that. You know, partly because of who's involved, you're like that, oh, I just hope this all goes all right for everyone.
And that's very nice of you to say. Thank you.
And going back to this idea of the relationships going on, it's across generations. And it's quite a romantic book in that way. You know, people, they maybe don't meet up when ideally they should, or there's a lot of problems with timing, which I think is probably true to every relationship. Do you view it, what you write as kind of romantic? Is that a big part of it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, romantic comedy really is what I would say a lot of it is, or it certainly strays into romantic comedy. So yeah, I always like to have a romance, and I like to read a romance as well.
And is that, I mean, in terms of bringing perhaps people, again, I'm not going to spoil, but you know, there are certain relationships, I'm thinking Struan and his relationships, where you're kind of going, oh, you know, this, you're making a mistake here. You know, you're always kind of banging your head of the you. Everyone can see what should happen, but him, apart from him, I mean, that must be quite good fun to write those as well, those kind of characters. I think everyone can.
I think, but also I think missed opportunity is very, very sad, and to write about it, and it's very, very sad to happen, and things that do just not happen because of timing. So, you know, that's always interesting as well. I like writing about that kind of thing.
Because there are some relationships across the generations here, which are absolutely lovely, actually, to read about.
Yeah, no, I like to write love story if I can.
So, your life as a writer, how did it begin? How did you start this job?
Back in the 90s, I was in London, working in London and writing, and trying to write for sketches and stand up and cartoons. I just could not get anything away. And then I had a day job. And then Helen Fielding came along and kind of really changed the game, because she was so popular and it was so funny. And suddenly every publisher in London was looking for young, funny women in London. I was in London. And so there was a whole raft of us really that got our breaks thanks to that kind of Bridget Jones phenomenon. So kind of Marion Keyes started up around then, Lisa Joe, before she was writing thrillers, she was writing kind of rom-coms, and we all just kind of suddenly got these chances that we would not have had before. You know, I'm not from a fancy background, and I didn't go to Oxford or anything. I didn't really know how these things were done, but it was the first time you could kind of get a shot at it if you weren't very well connected or very, very posh. And so we got a chance, and then once we were in, that's it. We weren't for moving. So yeah, we were. So again, I mean, it's funny we're talking about timing, but a lot of it was timing. But yeah, it was a quarter of a century ago. I mean, it seems amazing now.
Yeah,
40 books ago.
I'd forgotten that the Bridget Jones began in the newspaper. That's right, isn't it? I'm not misremembering that.
Yes. No, we used to in the office. We used to, whatever day it came out, like Tuesday or Wednesday, we would all gather round the newspaper and read it out. That is how much we loved it. It was like the best day of the week when it came out. I mean, it was so funny. And but also people forget, because there's been a lot of other stuff, but there'd been nothing like it before that. It was Jackie Collins and Julie Cooper, who both of them are brilliant, but it was a completely different, game until Bridget came along with her big pants. Oh, so yes.
And how has the world of publishing changed over the years since, as you say, you've been in it for a while?
Well, it's always in a crisis of one kind or another. There's never been anything that's not a terrible crisis. So, the big things really, we thought e-readers were going to change the world, and then quite a lot of people don't like them. Just went straight back to books, which is fine. The big thing that's come along now is how many people listen to their books is massive, and how important it is. And I do in the car, listen to books. And I love it. It's just an extra chance to get some more reading in while I'm doing something like walking the dogs or stuff. So that was a big change. Children's fiction, kind of burst into flames with J.K. Rowling and David Walliams. It's slightly petering out a bit now, which is one of these things they periodically worry about. But then there's massive teen publishing for young girls and so on. So things come and go in waves, but people still want to read. Even I think I always think of it like when the radio came along and then TV came along, and people are like, okay, well, that's the end of radio. About 96% of us listen to a bit of radio every week. I mean, it's an incredibly high percentage of people still listen to the radio. So, or the cinema, like when TV came along, or home video, or great big TVs. I love going to the cinema, people still do. So, yeah. I think a book is still the best brain-to-brain connection that I mean, obviously I would say this, but I still think it's the best way to get behind somebody else's eyes and look out through the eyes that they were looking at. And then when it's, a genius or it's somebody from history like Dickens or Eliot, you get that added layer of extraordinariness. I still think there's nothing anywhere near it. A good film is brilliant, but it's 2 hours. A book can take you over for a month.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And there was this concern when ebooks and when e-readers and things like that were coming out. But it has had a great resurgence, it seems to me. I mean, I think independent bookshops are doing as well as they have done in
yes,
years.
Yeah, they have. Huh?
Which is a fantastic thing to learn. And do you have any advice for anyone who would be with dreams of becoming a writer?
Yeah, I do, but they're nothing very particularly that you wouldn't find anywhere else. Read all the time. It's just like if you want to be a great violinist, you practice for 10,000 hours or whatever it is, and it's a much pleasanter apprenticeship. It's just you read all the time. Read all the time and then treat it like a job. I think there is a real tendency to go, write when the mood takes you. No, that's nonsense. Write like it's your job, even if to begin with it's only half an hour a day or 500 words or whatever it is. It doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. Even people that you wouldn't like, Irving Welsh, right, is an incredibly disciplined writer. Irving works every day. He gets his words down. Nev gets his words down every day. Don't think for a second that any of us who do it for a job and don't do anything else, are not all sitting down every single day with our laptops open, because it's just not true.
When I said if you call it a job, I didn't mean that in any kind of derogatory. No. I just mean that, you know, some people say, well, it's a calling, or it's, you know, whatever they might think.
Well, they do say that, and it's not very helpful though to people that are trying, you know,
Yeah,
that want to write,
absolutely.
because it's not. That makes it sound like it's some complicated magical thing that you're born with, like if you have to become a nun or something, and it's not like that. It responds well to practice. And it responds incredibly well to discipline. And I actually think everybody should write a little bit, even if it's just or not even if it's just a bit, particularly memoir. I think more and more how important it is to leave something behind for your children or your grandchildren about how you lived, just as things slip out of you so quickly. My dad was saying he wished he'd got his grandparents, who of course were Victorians, to write just the basic stuff about what it was like every day to go to school, and when they got a bath in the house and that kind of thing. And I said, well, would you do one for my kids? And he's written down just how he caught the bus in a winter's morning and what underwear he wore. That stuff is so important. And I think everyone should write a memoir for their families. Yeah. And then some of those memoirs will be interesting to the world at large. Even if it isn't, it's still worth doing.
No, that's a really interesting point, that people's everyday lives are more dramatic than they themselves think when they're going through it. But when you look at it from a different time, you know, the stories and the everyday life that happens to further generations will be, you did what? You did.
Yeah. I can't even remember now how we used to get about by Google Maps. My kids think it was fundamentally not possible. They're like, how did you book a plane ticket? I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, used to have it's agents in the high street that you would go and book your holiday. That seems like a thing to do now.
I know, student travel advice.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Jenny, for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Alistair. Thank you.
And all the very best with Close Knit. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, that's very nice. Cheers.
Cheers. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.